Before we start, it is important to say that the opinions expressed in the Shutter Sports podcast are individual and not necessarily representative of Spirit Live or Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you for listening. And as always, whether you agree or disagree, we invite you to join the discussion on Instagram at Shutter Sports Media or Twitter at Shutter Sports M.
Welcome to the Shutter Sports Podcast. I'm your host Eli, and today I'm joined by a group of people who all had a role in making the coverage of the USports tournament as great as it was. So why don't we go around the table and everyone say your name and what job you were working during the tournament.
My name is Dylan Baker. I was the color commentator for all 8 U Cup games on Radio-Canada on the French feed, and I also hosted the USports Awards breakfast on the Wednesday.
My name is Eric McDougall. I had a couple of roles. I was a audio mixer for 2 games. I was a ISO producer for a game, and I was a CG operator for another game. So I was spread out like a butter on toast.
And my name is Katie. I was the one of the many in-game photographers for USports and TMU Bold throughout the whole tournament.
I'm Eli, the host, and I had a mishmash of things. I was more so on the behind the scenes of the tournament, so I was setting up that awards brunch that Dylan and Katie were both working at. I handed out awards there. Just a few minor and major tasks. I had to hand out VIP passes and things like that. So just a mishmash of things for myself.
From the little leagues
to the pros.
This is your weekly sports show.
Welcome to the Shutter Sports Podcast.
Take a seat at the table as we discuss.
On today's episode, we'll be recapping the USports Men's Hockey National Championship. Here's how today's episode will work. We'll go around the table and break down each round of the tournament and give our thoughts on the history made this year. Let's start with a recap of the quarterfinal matchups. This round started with Brock facing off against UNB, TMU against Calgary, McGill versus UBC, and UQTR against Moncton. Let's start with you, Dylan, as somebody who had a very good look into each of the games.
Yeah, it was a really exciting quarterfinal round. We actually had a running joke with the production crew that the afternoon game, which was the one that Curtis Coleman and Matthew Smith both worked for each of the quarterfinals, was not good, and that's just because of them. And then the night game that Damien and Griffin were working was going to be the good one, because the afternoon games were not particularly great. UNB versus Brock was one-sided. It was only 2-0 through 2 periods for the Reds, but they were dominating play. And then the next day, UQTR Moncton was not a particularly close game either. But those evening games, the Calgary versus TMU was fantastic, really close game. And McGill versus UBC as well came right down to the 3rd period. So a couple of good games, a couple not so good games in the quarterfinals of the U Cup.
Yeah, the McGill game is interesting too because that's an upset. Like everyone's expecting UBC to win that, and it was a really close game, and McGill played really well. That was actually the only game that I was just watching, and it was really fun to just take that one in.
I think it was all the live band.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think the band had everything to do with it.
But McGill's not your average 6 seed, right? Like
yeah.
they were right near the top of the OUA standings during the regular season. They got that 6 seed because they were ahead of UQTR. They got that 6 seed because they faltered in the OUA playoffs, but they're a very solid team.
Yeah, I think they were actually, in my opinion, better than UBC on all fronts, offense, defense, goaltending. They were just so much more dominant and everything. It was a close game, obviously, but they were just looked better. They looked like they were had more chemistry, and they kind of came out like a video game. Like everything was going how it was planned to be.
Yeah, and Dylan, you have a little insight. It shouldn't have been that close of a game. There was actually a goal that wasn't counted.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to dive super deep into the details, but essentially what happened was there was a play where the McGill Redbirds took a shot that looked like it went in at first, and McGill was adamant the puck crossed the goal line, but it was called no goal, and the officials did not see it go in on the replay. And so that could have been a pretty controversial moment if McGill lost that game, but luckily for the Redbirds, they were able to hold on, and that goal didn't end up mattering because they won the game anyway. But yes, it could have been a little more separated than what it was.
Just quickly going over the first matchup of Brock and UNB, wasn't particularly close. UNB dominated the whole time, but I think it's important to mention why Brock stayed in that game so long and what benefits it brought to their goalie, Connor Unger. Katie, if you'd like to talk about that a bit.
It was not a close game when you look at ice time. Just looked like it was straight tilted vertically, like the puck was always in Brock's end. But their goalie, Connor Unger, Rookie of the Year for all of USports, had a great game, as he often does, and it benefited him. He ended up with a contract with the Oilers AHL team after that, and so he has a bright future ahead of him. I think he's a good goaltender.
Yeah, he played amazing. In the beginning, he didn't look too great. Like the first period, he got lit up a little bit, but after that, he really dialed in. And he made some
two
crazy
goals is
saves.
lit up.
I mean, yeah, it was 2 goals in the first period, and you're not getting any goals. That's a light up in my books in the first period. Like,
Yeah, against
When
that
UNB.
role-
Well,
gets
when the puck's
6-0.
in your end the entire time, I think only letting 2 goals is kind of miraculous. Brock didn't get a shot on goal until I think the last 5 minutes of the first.
Yeah.
They were really
So when the
close to
puck's
shut
staying
out.
in your end with all the blocks and everything going on, it's very impressive in my mind that only 2 goals were let in that entire time.
For sure was. I think the final shots were like 45-14, I think
I
was
just
the
about
exact
to look.
number.
Brock definitely only had 14.
On the scoreboard, I think it said 45-14. I don't know if they changed that after the fact online, but just a super one-sided game. And I mentioned on the broadcast, I said if there's any team that could upset UNB here, it's Brock and Connor Unger, because he could steal a game for the Badgers, and that turned out to not be true because the hydraulic press that is the UNB Reds was able to just pound the Badgers and pound everybody they faced over the weekend.
They're just a unit. Like, they act like a robot
But
together.
it also just feels like good vibes surrounding that team.
Yeah.
We had everybody here, or 3 of us here, saw a speech from their coach when he won Coach of the Year. I believe you had a conversation with him. I had just handed him an award, and he was super kind. He seems to run a tight ship, but at the same time,
Yeah, they
just
have a
a
lot of
very
fun.
friendly ship. They seem to have a lot of fun. We saw them in their pregame in the second round,
Yeah.
and they just looked like they were enjoying themselves while also keeping their heads in the game, and had their eye on the prize.
Well,
they're
sorry, Katie.
They're
go
a
ahead.
disciplined team on and off the ice. Like, the day of the final, they were there before I got there for the bronze medal game. Like, they apparently had been at the rink since 8 a.m. and they did not play until 5 p.m., which is actually just crazy.
Yeah.
And also, just that final stat, it was 44 shots and 41 saves, one of those empty net goals. So,
Yeah. Just to add on to UNB and their coach, Gardner McDougall, he was a super nice guy, gave me a couple of shout-outs during the awards breakfast, one during his post-game interview the next day, which was cool. But Gardner McDougall, fun story about him that I don't know how many people know. The St. John Sea Dogs in 2022, before the Memorial Cup, fired their coach after the playoffs and brought in Gardner McDougall to coach only the Memorial Cup tournament, and they won the Memorial Cup.
Yeah.
Gardner McDougall is the most successful coach in USports men's hockey history, and you know what? He runs such a good program. I had the chance to watch UNB practice on the Friday, their off day,
Yeah.
and that practice was so well run. It was so regimented, and everybody was executing everything perfectly, but you could still hear laughing and having a good time. McDougall was skating around smiling. So
it was actually crazy. I worked their practice on the Wednesday, the day of the awards
Yep.
breakfast. And it's just like everyone knew exactly what drill was coming up, exactly where they were going. He said like one word and they just were in the drill.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy program.
Do we just want to talk about the TMU Calgary game real quick, that overtime winner? It was just a tight game all around. Kai Edmonds stole that game for TMU for sure, and Carson Gallagher sealed the deal with that OT winner.
Gallagher, shout out to Carson Gallagher, a guy who was not guaranteed a spot on this team this year. Like, he was a guy who really had to fight for every second of ice time that he got. Underrated skill, Carson Gallagher.
Especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, scored a beauty in the Queen's Cup
Yep.
final, and then, of course, scores the overtime winner. Just an impressive performance this year, and TMU head coach Johnny Duco was able to rely on him down the
Yeah.
stretch.
Yeah, both those teams are definitely like pretty balanced. Calgary had like size advantage. I think their average height of their team is like 6'2" or something,
Something
or even
crazy like that.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like they're big
Huge.
boys. But this is definitely a battle of goaltenders. Like Carl Tedachuk for Calgary had 46 saves.
Yep.
He was amazing. It could have gone either way. It went double overtime. That just means like literally any shot, it was just like coming down to what happens. I think TMU hit a couple posts during
Yep,
the game.
there were some
Calgary hit
posts.
like a lot of close chances. It was definitely a matchup that I think was my favorite in the
Oh, for
entire
sure.
game. I worked it. I was there. I was like kind of mad, low key, that I was like, oh, double overtime, but I wasn't mad
No,
because
yeah,
it was
it was
such a
like
good game to
11
watch.
o'clock.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm ready to go to bed.
Hour-long train ride home for me was unpleasant, let me tell you. I was on the second last GO train out of Union Station that night, but man, what a fun game.
You made it.
I did.
Moving on to the second round, semifinals saw TMU against UNB in a bit of a bloodbath and McGill against UQTR in an OUA East rematch. Let's throw it over to you, Dylan.
Yeah, the semifinals were interesting because, like you mentioned, the bloodbath game between UNB and TMU was not a particularly good one. UNB showed why they were undefeated this season and how they were able to have so much success. But again, that night game between UQTR and McGill was fantastic. I mean, so much back and forth action. I've never seen this happen twice in a game where one team will score and then within 20 seconds, because I think the first response goal was scored 17 seconds after the other team's marker, and the next one was scored like 8 seconds after the other team scored. They were able to respond so quickly. First, it was UQTR going down the ice scoring. McGill answered back in a hurry, and then McGill scored the go-ahead goal after they were down 3-1 to make it 4-3, and then UQTR tied it up within 8 seconds or something crazy like that. What a game between the two Quebec universities in this tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what they always say, you're most vulnerable right after you get a goal. So, and a lot of it, to mention, first period, a lot of power play goals, a lot of shorthanded goals, going both ways. Yeah, it was a great game, great rematch. That series that they had in the OUA East finals were really close as well. Although there were 2 shutouts in that OUA series for UQTR, and that just shows Alexis Gravel really carried that team then, and he did this tournament as well.
Alexis Gravel, former draft pick of the Chicago Blackhawks. He was a very talented goaltender in junior, went to Blackhawks training camp a couple of seasons, now dominating for UQTR.
For sure.
Just a quick question for you, Dylan. Up to that point, you were covering every single French broadcast, and obviously McGill, UQTR, both Quebec schools, so predominantly French.
It's our Super Bowl.
Would you say that was the biggest game of your career up to that point, broadcasting-wise?
Maybe. There's a real possibility that it was. I mean, I don't know. We didn't get any viewership numbers on that game. Moncton UQTR was also a big one because Moncton is a fully French university, so I'm sure there were lots of people tuning in for that game. But yeah, it was a big game. It was 2 Quebec universities. I know it was well viewed on the English side because those games were on YouTube. The French side was only on the Radio-Canada website, so we didn't get any viewership numbers, but I would say that's probably, if not the biggest, certainly top 3 biggest games I've ever covered.
UNB UQTR would have been up there too, though, like the finals.
Yeah,
because
sure.
UNB is French as well.
Yeah. No, lots of big games that were a blast to be part of the coverage for.
For sure.
And you, Eric, another question is, you would have been in the control room for every single round. I think you were back there. Did you notice like a level of stress get progressively higher and higher as the games became more and more important?
I found it actually the opposite. I found the first game was the most stressful because with a bold live game, the team, you don't have to worry about commercial breaks. You don't have to worry about making sure there's you don't have to worry about a French broadcast and an English broadcast. You don't have to worry about half the stuff we worried about. So the first game was super stressful. You had to make sure all your marks hit because audio had to track everything. Graphics had to make sure things were live, updated both French and English. By the last game, we kind of got into this routine where everything was you knew what's coming next, you know what's all flowing, and it was almost like a well-oiled machine. It was UNB was in our control room running the broadcast. It was just that perfect. There was definitely stress going into the final. Wow, this is the national broadcast. This is for all of Canada, the top cheese. But
yeah,
definitely, I think the opposite when it came to actually producing and doing the actual job of the control room. Just
want to say, by the finals, and I'm sure you think this is the case too, Eric, everybody in that control room and everybody that was working on air could have recited the rundown from memory. It was the same thing every show, and I think that helped everybody get comfortable quickly, but at first it was a huge adjustment.
Yeah. I remember one of the audios, the second clip you play this intro, and then you play the second French intro, and the audio jump between those two was insane.
Yeah.
And it was all in part of one clip, so if you didn't mix the audio down, it's your earbuds, they start to bleed because it was how loud it was.
And then we'll cover the TMU UNB game quickly, but I don't think there's much to talk about.
Yeah.
From a fan perspective in that game, it was just hard to be there. We had more UNB fans in the building than TMU easily. They all traveled with the team.
Shout out to the traveling clan for UNB.
For sure.
That was
impressive.
Impressive.
If you go to a tournament knowing you're going to win, you're going to bring in a pretty big crowd.
No, but they were also all super kind people.
Oh, yeah, they were great.
Yeah. We had UNB.
That's the New Brunswick way.
And they were all just super kind, lovely people, and we ended up chit-chatting with them as TMU got blown out 7-0.
But no, Kai Edmonds had a great game that game. He had a good game. It could have been much worse if it wasn't. Kai, think if you had any other goalie in net, could have been a worse game. He had some great saves, especially early in the first. TMU came out. I had hope.
Yeah.
They came out so strong, so fast. They got the first shot of the game off, which hadn't happened in the tournament against UNB, and I don't think did again after. Really, it looked promising, and then it just kind of went downhill.
Yeah, no, TMU, they came out with some momentum. They're we're going to do this, and then all of a sudden, they didn't do it, and they really didn't do it. UNB took full control of that game after the first 5 or so minutes, and you could just see when UNB scored their first goal, TMU got a little more dejected. But by the time that second was scored, they're okay, we're done. We're not coming back in this game. And it kind of just snowballed from there.
And it goes back to the discipline for UNB. They just know what they're running, and they keep doing it and keep doing it. And TMU emulated that in the first 5 minutes. But as soon as it went the other way, that's where the discipline and endurance you can see why UNB is so good.
I was sitting right where the TMU comes out, and like obviously you can see them get progressively more defeated and sadder in their like eyes and just their body language as that first period went on. And they come off the ice. Everybody thinks that TMU is just going to feel as if this game is over. And they surprisingly came back on the ice for the second period, and they looked like they still had it in them. And then by the end of that second is when like true defeat had hit them, and they knew.
Statistically, they actually played better.
Yeah, in the second and third. They got more and more shots as UNB started trying less and less.
But another...
I was going to say, UNB started to pass the puck quite a bit.
They implemented the 3-pass rule.
3-pass rule.
Yeah. But you can also tell by TMU, they had 7 infraction and 14 penalty minutes.
Yeah, that does
on the game, which is just it just shows how like pissed off they were getting at just like the game.
Sure.
Also, like
Kai Edmonds tripping the people in front of the
that was hilarious. Pulling out your stick and just that was really funny to watch. The other thing about that game is I found TMU, like despite all these penalty minutes, weren't being physical at the right times. No. They were being physical out of anger, and when there were moments where like Hyman specifically should have laid on a massive hit, he like just lightly bumped into somebody.
He was playing hurt. Hyman,
was he?
He was dealing with something. That's why he didn't play in the Queen's Cup against UQTR. He was playing
He took
with
Bowie's
something.
spot in this. Like his Bowie was out with a broken knuckle, and so Hyman came in for...
I don't know what was hurting Hyman, but he was cleared enough to play in the U Cup, but you could tell
it was hard to
like
watch.
in the quarterfinal against Calgary. I was talking to a few people that were covering the game. I was talking to Griffin Butler and David Brosseau, my play-by-play guy, and we were saying like every time that Hyman would call for a pass, he'd wind up for the one-timer, and then he'd hesitate and catch it with his skate because he couldn't get that shot off. Like there was something up with him, but I agree with you that a lot of those penalties, a lot of that physicality was born out of frustration.
Yeah.
You often hear talk about a good penalty versus a bad penalty.
And TMU's not an overly physical team. Like they have Zach Roberts and Elijah Roberts really are the two frontmen. And
Jackson Doherty too. He loves
Jackson Doherty.
Yeah.
But the two Roberts, they're not big men, really.
Yeah.
And they're like, if they're leading your physicality, it's not gonna...
Both scrappy guys, like aren't scared of getting hurt. They're fun to watch.
I think the only big takeaway for TMU is that they can kill penalties. They took 7 penalties that game and let 1 goal in, so they can kill penalties.
UNB too.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have just
That's
kept
what I'm
4
saying.
guys on the ice during
They should
that
have played shorthand.
game against UNB.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, let's get to the medal day. TMU and McGill had a familiar matchup in the bronze medal game, and UQTR challenged UNB, hoping to score the first goal against the Reds all tournament. Let's throw it over to you, Katie, to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, we'll start with the bronze medal game. TMU and McGill were, as you said, very familiar with each other. Our homecoming game at TMU was against McGill, beat them. I forget the matchups, but I believe TMU beat them more times than McGill.
January 13th, I want to say. McGill was at TMU. McGill was leading 2-1 after 2 periods. TMU came back, won that game 5-2. That was the only time they faced off in the regular season.
Yeah, because the homecoming game was not regular season, but it was a 2-game series, and I think we took them both. And so that would make it 3 times beating them, and they lost the one that really mattered.
I think they were so dejected from that UNB game.
It happens.
The energy throughout the whole building during that game was just awful. It was the day after.
It was an 11 a.m. game.
11 a.m.
Day after St. Patrick's.
Yeah.
Not a lot of energy in the building. One important thing to note, Elijah Roberts in what was likely his last game playing in fairly high-level competitive hockey. He has a daughter now. He's probably going to move on, start a family. TMU is his last competitive hockey run. He played in the O. Got the first goal of the game 2 minutes in. What a good moment for him to just have a goal in his last game. And it was a good moment for TMU. Again, thought there was some hope. You know, they started off strong again, but just couldn't finish.
And Brandon Frattaroli decided to ruin that good moment, scoring 2 goals. And he's not the player. He's not that guy for McGill. He actually had 3 shots the entire national tournament.
Well,
2 of them were big ones.
It's funny you mentioned that, Eric, because he was fantastic in the regular season for them. He was their points leader, if I'm not mistaken, during the regular season. Didn't lead them in goals. That, I believe, belonged to Eric Uba. But for McGill, it was Frattaroli who paced them in points. And David Brosseau and I were talking on the broadcast of that game and said, he's been kind of invisible in this tournament. We'll see if he has an impact. And then sure enough, he scores a couple of great goals on a couple of great passes from Scott Walford. The first one, a rebound where Frattaroli was able to put it home. And then the go-ahead goal, the second goal that Frattaroli scored, was just a fantastic pass from the left circle by Walford. Walford, a former draft choice of the Montreal Canadiens, he was able to find a seam and execute a great pass to Frattaroli, who made a nice move on Kai Edmonds. And like we've talked about, like the energy was not there in the building, like you said, Eli, but particularly for TMU, there was just, it didn't seem like anybody really came to play with everything they had that day, with the exception of probably some of the graduating guys like an Elijah Roberts that we've talked about.
Yeah. And again, McGill had their band. The energy was really on their side.
Let's talk about the final game of the tournament, which was UQTR versus UNB. UQTR obviously hoping for the upset here. How did things play out, Dylan?
The way you'd expect them to. I mean, I thought UQTR might put up a bit more of a challenge, but UNB is just such a well-oiled machine. And we've talked about the fact that UNB did not allow a goal all tournament. Credit to Samuel Richard, the goalie.
Yeah,
he was fantastic.
Not that he saw like a ton of shots, but
in
the
that
ones he did,
game,
that
he
one
was tested.
It was close. Yeah,
yeah, he had his fair share of tests against TMU and against Brock, but in that UQTR game in the final, he had to make some big saves, and he was clutch. And he actually ended the season on a streak of 200 plus minutes without allowing a goal, because in the playoffs he also had not allowed a goal for a certain stretch. UNB ended the year where they hadn't allowed a goal in even more time. Like just crazy stats coming out of the UNB run, and just incredible stuff that all culminates in a big shutout gold medal victory.
And even that goes back to the goalie statement, to the practice. They had this drill where they had to like dump it in, whatever, and then you have to go until you score. And I didn't realize they were going until they score, until they finally scored like 10 minutes later and all celebrated they were finally done the drill. I was like, that's what we were waiting for? I thought it was timed, but no, this guy just didn't let a goal in for like 10 minutes straight on his own teams. And UNB, they all have insane shots too. And the fact that he like didn't even let them score is crazy.
His regular save percentage over the season, I heard, was like 95 or something.
It was something crazy like that. I think both goalies had a goals against under 2 and a save percentage over like 925-ish. And he actually won the MVP of the U Cup last year as a first-year goalie, which is like unheard of. And their backup, Griffin Outhouse, he was terrific during the regular season too. They split the games all the way up until the U Cup, where Richard got every game. During the regular season, I think Richard had 16 games and Outhouse had 14. And then in the playoffs, they rotated every game because they just felt that confident in the goaltending tandem they had. Outhouse was a talented fourth year, Richard just in his second season, but you could have put either one of those guys and you could have been confident in a victory.
Championship game, they didn't see that many shots in each period. I think that they didn't break single digits. Like, UQTR didn't break single digits in shots. So that just shows, like, even the UNB's goal, like Richard, was not seeing shots the whole game. I mean, he wasn't even ready for most of the game. Like, he wasn't warm. He just had to make those big saves whenever there was chances, because UQTR had those chances. There was definitely a lot of close calls where they could have put the puck behind the net, but Richard just had to be there. He just was there, and you couldn't remove him.
Yeah. Again, talking about the consistency of UNB, they had exactly 11 shots in each period.
Wow. Impressive.
Yeah.
That's automated.
They're a robot.
Before we wrap up, I think we should talk about the publicity that has been surrounding this year's tournament, from players getting NHL contracts out of it to UNB making headlines and even being mentioned on the Spittin' Chicklets podcast. Our social media lead, Caitlin LeBoutillier, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, yeah, obviously this tournament... Sorry, I just wrote an article on this, actually. But what I was going to say was...
Plug.
Yeah, go read it. That's what I was going to say. No, USports doesn't get the same publicity, obviously, that the NCAA does. Not even close. Often it's not even seen as a legitimate path to get to the NHL or a career in hockey. And so it was nice to see, obviously, the Connor Unger contract come out of this year's tournament. And UNB, Biz Nasty, Paul Bissonnette, got on his Spittin' Chicklets podcast, and credit to him for bringing up UNB and their run. Obviously, you go undefeated for a whole season, it's going to turn some heads. But he said he got on his own podcast and said he thinks they could beat the winner of the NCAA tournament, and he wants to see it happen. He even said, and I quote, "I'll fund that bleep." He said he'd fund it. So hopefully that ends up happening. And then the captain, Jason Wilms of UNB,
former
retweeted.
London Knight, shout out London, Ontario.
Oh, all right. He retweeted and said, like, he's all for it. Their team's waiting. They've been waiting for it. They want it. They want all the smoke. So I really hope that happens. It would bring just a lot more eyes to USports, and they deserve it. And I think they could give any NCAA team a run for their money.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the TMU UConn women's basketball earlier this year, and I think that was hard to see, obviously. So I don't know if the winner is the best place to start for the U Sports. Obviously, Hockey Canada will put up probably much better a fight. But I just want to see them against like a decent D1 school to start out with and see how that goes and then play off from there. I don't think going head-to-head top versus top right away might be the best decision. But if that's what happens, it will still be extremely fun to watch and to see what happens.
I think they could do it.
I think they could go with. They're like the difference between D1 and U Sports is just age, strength, and experience. These guys played.
UNB's got the age.
Yeah, they've played 4 years of semi-professional. Not, would it be
Major junior?
Major junior hockey, and they played 4 years because they were good. They just weren't good enough to get drafted right away. So they definitely would.
A lot of them did get drafted. They just UNB has quite a few NHL draft picks.
Yeah, that's what was also crazy about the tournament. Every broadcast, someone would drop this guy's an NHL draft pick. This guy's. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Everyone's an NHL draft pick.
Yeah,
what's going on?
There were quite a few in the tournament. Like that was. U Sports doesn't get enough credit as is, so I like seeing this. I mean, Connor Unger signing in Edmonton, that's big for U Sports coming right out of the tournament. Signing an entry level deal with the Edmonton Oilers. You see a lot of guys get like professional tryouts out of this stuff, but to see a guy actually sign an NHL entry-level contract, I think that's a big deal for the sport. And I think that if this game were to occur between UNB and the national champion in the U.S., it would certainly be interesting. You mentioned the UConn TMU game, maybe a little different on that scale, I would think, but it would definitely be a major source of publicity, especially worth mentioning with the recent stories that the CHL will start allowing their players to play in the NCAA after they play in the CHL. That certainly takes away from the pool of players that U Sports can bring in. So if this game does happen, it could be an important little spot for U Sports to get some recognition.
Yeah,
that's really good.
I wanted to bring
on
that up,
part. Yeah,
CHL, because I think what happened was the NCAA saw this tournament and said these guys are good at hockey. Like, why aren't we letting them come play in our schools? And it's also only going to benefit U Sports because now it's going to make U Sports an achievable place for high school players to play hockey instead of just going straight to junior.
Yeah, but that's kind of the opposite of what they want to be doing. Like, they want to be an avenue for people to go to career hockey and, like, actually make a professional career after, and it's just going to take away all the quality players. But what I was saying is kind of a chicken and egg situation. Like, you want people to come to Canada and play U Sports to have a career, but they only do that if the scouts are watching. The scouts aren't watching if it's not high-level hockey, and so you kind of got to invest in scouts coming first so that people want to come, or get those good players, get more eyes on it. And the issue with that in the U Sports tournament that just occurred was originally Toronto's obviously an easily accessible place. You have a lot of scouts. You have the Leafs right there. Like, people are going to want to come watch the U Sports if they're being hosted in Toronto instead of if they're in Moncton or if they're all the way in St. John or who knows. And so you'd think a lot of scouts would have come. And originally 200 scouts were going to be in the area for the tournament, but then U Sports bumped the prices up to over $200 for a scout to attend the tournament, and only under 10 scouts came to watch. And so, interesting choice.
Yeah, as somebody who is working the passes table and things like that, but we also got to talk to the ticket booth people. And they had NHL scouts. I think one of the examples specifically was the Winnipeg Jets. And they have their NHL ID, something along those lines, and they flash it like, "Hey, I want to go watch the games." And they were like, "Hey, you've got to pay." And they turned away scouts that just wouldn't pay to come watch the hockey.
Yeah.
So a lot of scouts just wouldn't pay the $200, which seems a little insane that if you're scouting for a multi-million-dollar franchise, you won't pay $200 to go try to see some top players, which is really
$200 is an insane price for that.
It's high, but to retort your point there, Eli, the thing is they probably feel they could better invest that $200 going somewhere else. That's the thing.
For sure, and I think they shouldn't have had to pay the $200.
Oh, for sure.
But the guy's from Winnipeg and he's in Toronto, I would have paid.
Well,
they definitely have people in Toronto.
Yeah,
he didn't fly to Winnipeg.
But
I think if you're
that
U
$3
Sports,
subway ride.
Yeah, but if you're U Sports, you gotta maybe take the hit on profit in the short term, and you'll benefit in the long term.
Well, yeah, this NCAA move is really going to hurt U Sports, I think, because you're going to lose a lot of talented CHL players who will go to the U.S. college ranks. It's going to be great for the CHL because you'll have less guys turning away from the CHL, which has been a problem in recent years, guys who hold out to go play in the U.S. You'll have more players who will say, okay, I'll come to the CHL and then go to college afterwards. It's going to be a great move for the CHL, a solid move for the NCAA, but it's really going to hurt U Sports. So I think the next little bit before that gets implemented is going to be a pivotal time for U Sports to make their mark and make their impact. I think this was a good tournament, and showing off in a game against the national champion in the U.S. could allow them to prove that, hey, we've got talent here, we've got good programs here, and we are an avenue to get players to the professional ranks. This tournament, although there were only, what did you say, less than 10 scouts, Katie? I think it was 8 or 9, the number.
Yep.
Even though there were that few scouts, there are still guys who are rumored to be going to the professional ranks. Connor Unger signed officially. There are other players who might be joining him professionally next year. Like, this is a huge, huge moment for U Sports to make something happen and to prove that they are still worthwhile for elite level hockey players.
And don't get me wrong, I love to see these guys have their careers afterwards, but I think U Sports also, not just, obviously they need to brand themselves as a way to get further into pro hockey, but also it's free education for these guys. All of them played in the OHL. Most of them played 4 years, so they're also getting an education. So if hockey doesn't work out, they at least are coming out of this with a degree. And I think that's important to mention. Obviously, you want to see these guys going on to the pros. It's great when you see them go to the NHL, but realistically, majority of them don't, but they're at least walking out of this. They got to keep playing hockey, and they got their education too.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. It's a huge part of it.
Thank you for joining us on the Shutter Sports Podcast. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you find your podcast, and don't be shy to join the discussion on any platform at Shutter Sports Media. Until next time, I'm Eli, joined by
Dylan Baker,
Eric McDougall,
And Katie LeBoutillier.
and this has been the Shutter Sports Podcast.
Shout out Julian in the back.
I do that my last little bit.
I'm sorry.
I cut it, I think, every time.
I do a little clap, and then I go, shout out to the producer, Julian Rose.